Now we're getting ready to start batch 610. It's another batch of the sliced tomatoes, and the amount that I have left, I think I can fit on the trays in one batch if I put them 3 layers thick. However, if I put them 3 layers thick, one of the problems will be that the middle layer will take longer to dry because the top one is exposed to the heat from the tray above, from the heater pad above. The bottom one is sitting on the heated tray, but the middle one gets kind of insulated by the other 2 layers of tomatoes. So it may take an extra 5 or 10 hours. I don't really know how much extra, but we have the data from this last one, and then we could look at the new data. And if it does take an extra 5 or 10 hours, I'd rather have it do that than have to do yet another batch of the tomatoes. And I might have a few left over anyway. I don't know if it's going to fit on the trays or not. If we have more, it'll be mixed in another batch, a mixed batch, for later. So let's get them on the trays. I'll wait till we get them all loaded to get the weights because I won't really know how many layers we're going to have until the end, till I kind of even them out. And I will be putting the parchment on them. Now, if I use two pieces of parchment like last time, then I can use the same tear weight as last time. And if I use 3, I know that 3 pieces of parchment this size weighs 10 grams of this parchment. Then I can just take the empty tray weight and add 10 grams for that tear weight. So either way, I know what it is. And then trying to work on them quickly, and these are not as evenly sliced. This is the set that I actually sliced first, and I didn't do as even of a job. I used a different slicing guide, and it wasn't as good. I'm going to start with 2 layers in each tray and see how far that gets us. So I've got them, all 4 of them with 2 layers. The problem with going 3 layers, which I was hoping to do, is that they'll be taller than the tray. I think they might slide off. So what would happen if I do go 3 high? So if I don't know. This is tray 2. Gonna add a 3rd layer and see what happens. So the problem will be that they might slide too easy. Well, I don't know. If I move them slow and careful, I think they'll be okay. Well, let's see what happens. Okay, I'm gonna try it. So this one's tray 2. So 1703 for the total. We're gonna try that. We'll just have to move them carefully and slowly. It's going to end up very thick. So that doesn't leave a lot of tomatoes left. So I still had a few more that have salt that are still in the freezer, and I'll put those with these, and we'll get those on another batch. With that done, now these can go into the freeze dryer. I forgot. I'll tuck thermometers into each one, and then we'll go over to the freeze dryer. So I'll meet you over there. So they're 3 layers thick. We'll see what they do. The freeze dryer's been pre-cooling for 2.5 hours already, which means it's really, really cold. It's almost 50 below already. I kind of got busy doing other stuff once again, so it's colder than it needs to be. We'll get them in there now. And tray 4, and then we'll work our way up, and we'll move pretty carefully so we don't shake any of them off. All of them are in there and none of them fell off, so that's good. I have the older machine, which means the whole machine is tilted down. The rack shelves are tilted down toward the back for the drainage. The newer ones, they adjusted it so that the machine itself is tilted, but the rack is higher in the back and lower in the front so that it stays level. So you don't have to worry about things sliding off the trays when it's level. Anyway, it's in there. The other batch of tomatoes took 30 hours, 32 hours, something like that. This will be more than that because there's more layers. I would not be surprised if this took 40 hours or more. We'll be back in a couple of days and check on it. So don't go away, it'll be just a minute. This batch, number 610, has been in there for about 42 hours. However, the drying time, the actual freeze drying time, is only about 36.25 hours because then it finished and then sat overnight. Well, it sat this morning until I came down just now to check it and do the weight check. I saw it when it was about 29.5 hours, and it said that it only had 6.75 hours to go, but the thermometers in the food or between the layers of food said that it was only 25 degrees or less. With 25 degrees or less, I know that it's not that close to being done. So at 6.75 hours later, it might have been time to check them, but I have my serious doubts as to whether or not they'd be done, especially since I layered the tomatoes 3 layers deep this time, so the middle layer is the one I'm most concerned about. We'll get them out and check them, and then weigh them, put them back in for more final dry time for the weight check. So let's get them out. So I'll use the down arrow to bypass the rest of it, and then open the drain valve. We'll be rotating the tray positions again as normal. So tray 1, I need to move these slowly. Okay, they've shrunk down. They've definitely shrunk down in thickness. So now that top layer is not above the edge of the tray. So they did get a little bit thinner. Okay, they are slippery though. So okay, currently 815 grams. Tray 2. 818. I'm going to put tray 2 on the very top spot, and tray 1 down here. Now tray 3. 819. Tray 4. Let's take a look at a middle layer one on one of these. So I don't want to disturb them too much. I'm going to put the disc in place, so I'm going to just shift some of these over and check these out. That has a cool spot right there. That is not dry in the middle yet. And I'm not surprised. It's not in direct contact with anything, so it's going to take a long time for these for the heat to migrate up through these to do the drying. Okay, so they're definitely going to take more time, and I could rotate them around, I suppose, you know, configure them, put them on different layers. Let's get them back in. Oh, should have done that further forward. Okay, so I kind of just stuck it through the paper and then under the top tomato. Same thing on each of those two. Now we'll get them back in. I'm going to put tray 4 up a spot and tray 1 down a spot. Okay, that thermometer that I put underneath, it's markedly lower. It's only showing 70 degrees where these others are showing 100. So we have some weights of what it is right now. Now we're going to give it, I'm going to give it more than 2 hours because we found damp spots in that middle layer. It won't be done in 2 hours. Even if it thinks it's done, it's not done in 2 hours. I'm going to give it at least 4 hours, and we're going to have to do another dry check. In fact, this one I could erase and ignore because it has no value. If you feel or find a spot that you suspect is damp or cold, this had damp spots guaranteed in a couple of the pieces of the middle layer of tomatoes. The top layer felt perfect, but the middle layer definitely had damp spots. So this isn't a real dry check at this point. Dry check really is when you think it's already dry, you're sure it's dry, and then you're testing it to make sure that it's stopped losing weight. So you're confirming that it's dry. I know it's not dry, so I can ignore this weight, come back in 4 hours, do another check for my beginning weights. So I'm going to erase these weights, pretend they never happened. I'll put them on a post-it note so that I can compare it, but they will lose weight. I know they're going to lose weight. I don't know if all 4 trays will lose weight, but the 2 that I checked the middle layer, both of those still have weight to lose. So we'll come back in, I'll give it 4 hours, like I said. So close the drain valve. So I'm going to add more dry time. I did close the drain valve. Going to put continue. It's going to tell me I still need additional cooling time on the pump. I know from my experience with the fan blowing on it that I really don't. So I'll touch the clock to bypass that. And then I'm going to bump it up. And on this older firmware, it goes a quarter of an hour at a time. The new one, my sister's, goes a half hour at a time. So anyway, I'm going to bump this up to 4 1/4. That gives me 4 full hours before the heaters turn off. At my next check in about 4 hours, it'll have been about 42.5 hours total for this batch. That's still pretty good considering I have a 3rd layer of tomatoes in there. That middle layer I knew would be slower because of the way the heat transfers, and it is slower. We'll come back in about 4 hours or more, depending on if I get sidetracked or if I get too busy. I can just simply add more time, but it'll be at least 4 hours. So I'll be right back. So my plan was to give this batch 4 more hours and then check it. Well, it's been 5 more hours, so I had to add another hour. So now we'll get them out and get a starting weight for the final dry check, or a starting weight for the dry check. The weights that we got before I'm not going to use because I know it can't be dry during that time, because it was still some cold, damp spot in a couple of the tomatoes in the middle layer. So therefore, I know that any weight that I get now will have dropped, which means that I don't have a weight that could be finished 2 hours ago. And that's the point, is to be able to go, I had no weight loss during this test period, so I know it was dry at that point earlier. I'm not looking to find out if it's dry now. The only way I can tell if it's dry now is to make sure that I have no weight drop over a period of time. You could get an available water meter to find out if a small sample is dry right now, within 5 or 10 minutes. That's how long the testing takes. But the cheapest ones are hundreds of dollars, and the only ones that I would trust would be thousands of dollars, and it's still a small sample size. It doesn't weigh, or it doesn't measure the water activity levels of the entire batch. Weight does, essentially. So we'll get them out and check them. So bypass the rest of the time using the down arrow. We'll open the drain valve, and starting with tray 1. And it's nice and toasty. It's very warm because I didn't give it time for the heaters to turn off. That's 810, so that's 5 gram loss from before. And if we unbury a few and look into there, okay, now they look and feel dry. Most of them did before also. 5 grams of water would be a teaspoon. That would be way too much water to have in there. So 810. So now this gives me a starting point that might be dry. And we can check it in 2 more hours and find out if it is dry. 806. That's down by 12 grams. Now these will go back up, and so I'll put these back on the same place I just had them in tray 3. And tray 3, the tray is not as warm as the others, and it usually, at the bottom position, it usually isn't. So that one's 804. That lost 15 grams. That's 3 teaspoons of water out of that. Tray 4, 806. Okay, and that's down by 6 grams. I'm going to put 4 back down at the bottom and 3 up one, and I'm going to reposition these 2 also. So very gently. Yeehaw! Okay. Now we've got numbers that might represent dry food. The first time it had a lot of moisture in it still, at least a couple of tablespoons. That would be absurd to put those in bags, though if you didn't weigh them, you might have thought they were dry. Now, we'll get it restarted, come back and check it in 2 hours. If there's weight loss during these 2 hours, that means they're still not dry, even though by all other measures, you would think they were dry. If you're using a thermal imaging, it was all warm. If you're using some kind of spot meter, they're all feel dry. If you're just snapping them and hoping for the best, you'll think they're dry. I'm not going to guess, I'm going to know to the best of this method. So I'm going to add more final dry time. I did close the drain valve. And a quarter hour, that gives me 15 minutes leeway to get there in time. So if it's dry at the end of this, if it doesn't lose any weight during these 2 hours, then I know it's dry now, and it'll have been finished in 42.5 hours of freeze dryer time. The other few hours it's going to show are the times when it should have been running, but I didn't get down and check it and restart it. So those don't count. Okay, we'll be back in a couple hours. I'll see you then. It's just about 2.25 hours later. I'm going to take them out and check them. Let's get this finished. I'm going to bypass the last 50 seconds, open the drain valve, and tray 1, 810. Tray 2, that dropped 2. That's down by 2. We will not be taking these out yet. Oh, I'm going to put tray 2 on the top this time. That actually dropped more. I'm going to leave it down here. Tray 3, that's also down by 2. And that one didn't change. Okay, these are going back in. 2 trays didn't have any weight loss. 2 trays had 2 grams each. It's going back in. It may be done now because it's been 2.25 more hours, but that's not good enough. The maybe it's done isn't good enough. I'd rather give it overnight. In fact, since it's late at night, I'm not going to take it out until tomorrow morning. Actually, it won't even be that early because I have other stuff I need to do first thing in the morning. So this is going to be sitting until past noon. So it's going to be in there for at least another 14 hours. It won't be freeze drying all that time. Most of the time it'll be sitting with just the cooling unit, the refrigeration unit running. I don't need the vacuum pump running except for when it's drying. So I'll give it 3 or 4 more hours and then I'll recheck it tomorrow afternoon. I mean, I could do it in another 2 hours, but I don't want to. I'm going to go to bed. It had 4 grams of loss. That's too much to chance. Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow. Well, it's like this. It's close to 24 hours later now. It wasn't just a little while. It wasn't first thing in the morning. I had a bunch of things to do today, and if I'd have realized it was going to take me so long to get back to this, I would have taken the trays out, put them in a giant plastic bag, put them in the freezer, because they were almost done, so chances are they could have just stayed out, and then I could have put them back in to finish the drying, because they were probably dry enough to be perfectly fine and safe. But I didn't. So I could have taken them out, put them in the freezer, and defrosted the freeze dryer overnight, and then put them back in instead of letting it run the whole time. Now, the vacuum portion of it, the drying, has not been running the whole time. The vacuum only ran about 4 hours out of the last 24 hours. The rest of it, it's just been the cooling unit sitting here using power and not doing anything effective as far as freeze drying. So I should have handled it differently, but I didn't realize that it was going to be until now before I got back to it. So there's no problem. Let's get them out and check them. And hopefully they didn't lose any weight during all that time. If they did, I'm going to put them back in again and give it a couple more hours. It seems unlikely that they're still wet, but I can't tell without checking. I'll go ahead and bypass the rest of the time using the down arrow, and then we'll get them out. I'll open the drain valve. So starting with tray 1. And right now it's very toasty, and it's 8:10, so no change. And tray 2. No change. I'll look under here, make sure that it's not touching. It is not, and no change. And this one hadn't changed last time even, and still no change. So I'll shut the machine off with the no defrost button. Whew. We'll come back in just a minute, look at the power usage and the time. You can see it says about 73¼ hours. So it's showing about 73¼ hours. I noticed on my sister's new machine that the timer tracks the time it's actually processing, not the time that it's in the pause mode. So it says it's done, but you haven't come to take it out yet. If my machine had that, it should be reading about 49¾ hours, maybe a couple hours less than that, but not more than that. So I don't have that on this old machine. On the old machine, it keeps the timer running for the entire process. And so the ultimate would be to have both. You'd have a total elapsed time and a processing time. When people ask me how long did that batch take with 3 layers of tomatoes, I would use the about 48 to 50 hour range as the answer, not the 72 hours, because that's not what it took. But it's all I would have for the data if I hadn't paid attention to the pause times for it. Now we'll get this ready for defrosting, and you can use the defrost function of the machine. I don't, because it adds wear and tear to the machine. The electrical components are under a higher strain. They're putting more power through it. I mean, that's the way I think about it. That might be the wrong way to think about it. But I also want the door open, because if I use the defrost function with the door closed, it's going to make a warm, moist environment, which is very conducive to molds and mildews. So I'd have to make sure as soon as it's defrosted enough that I come back down, get the door open, and get a fan blowing in it to get it dry. Well, it took me 24 hours to get back to this. For something that's just defrosting, that could be a problem to make sure that I get back down here to do that. So I'm safer just using this function. And yes, it probably takes an hour or 2 longer than the defrost function, maybe more. I've only used the defrost function, I think, once or twice in the 610 batches. I'm not really interested in using it for that. I'm not usually in that big of a hurry. If I were, and so if I was really desperate to get that next one in, that might be a great way to do it, because then I would be back right away to make sure that it's restarted and recooled, so it doesn't have that warm, moist environment for any length of time. And so I don't have a problem with using it. It just doesn't work for the way I operate this. For yours, it might be perfect. The power usage on that batch was 40.69 kilowatt hours, which at our electricity costs around here would be a little more than $4. So that one is one of the highest I've had because of the sheer length of time that I let it go. So now I've got it reset and ready for the next batch. And of course, the real power usage would have been considerably less, because there's at least 24 hours of that it's not part of the freeze drying. All of these tomatoes combined were just under 8.5 pounds before they're freeze dried. I'm going to go ahead and get the weight on them and find out what they weigh now, and then we'll get them bagged. Starting at the beginning with tray 1.
Taxi!
We have a decent amount of tomatoes here. This started out as a little under 8.5 pounds and ended up as just about a little more than 1/3 of a pound. a little less than 4/10 of a pound. So I've got my gross weights before, and then my weights of the paper and pans, and I subtract that out and I get how much the tomatoes weighed before. And do the same thing afterwards, and we get all the weights of what they weigh now. Now I've also have how much water that lost. It lost 3,658 grams. So it lost, well, I guess I could tell because the math. So it lost just a little more than 8 pounds of water out of that. Now it just weighs a few ounces. I don't really need the data on the water loss because I have no intention of putting the water back in these. My plan is to coat them with a little bit of Miracle Whip, and if you like mayonnaise, you could do that instead. We're Miracle Whip people for the most part, but anyway, coat it with a bit of Miracle Whip and put it on a sandwich, on a burger. I wouldn't plan on rehydrating these. If you try to rehydrate these, they're going to turn to mush, which is fine if you want a sauce, but if you're going to make sauce out of tomatoes, make it before you dry them. If you make the sauce before you dry them, you can cook it down a little bit. It'll get rid of some of the rawness. It will help preserve them better because they're stopping the enzymes and things. And you're driving off a lot of the water before you do the freeze drying process. You'll save a lot of time. You can get 30 or 40 pounds of tomatoes, make them into a sauce, cook them down, and have just 10 pounds when you go to freeze dry them. It's more concentrated. It's a better way to freeze dry sauce, I think. It's the way we've freeze dried sauce. But these are about tomato slices. Now, we'll get these bagged and then put on shelves. It's a lot of tomato. Because it's going to take quite a while to bag all these, I'm going to help protect them from moisture by putting them in a heavy-duty Ziploc bag or a heavy-duty zipper bag. So these are a freezer-type bag, so they're not near as good as a Mylar bag, but it's a whole lot better than sitting out here. So I'll get them in the bags, and then we'll start bagging them after that. A lot of slices of tomatoes. When I was bagging the last batch, I put the tomato slices in the little sandwich bags and then folded them over and put them in there in the Mylar bag. This time I'm going to try them directly into the bag, but I'm going to puff them up with air. I was hoping to do nitrogen with these, but I don't have the nitrogen yet. I couldn't get everything I needed for that today. So I'm going to try it with just the air and hope for the best. It's not the best way to do it, but if I puff them up and then it shrinks back down by 21% as it uses up the oxygen, it doesn't seem to squish them. The ones that I did on the last batch seem like they're fine. The bag has shrunk down, but it hasn't squished the tomatoes. So I'm going to give that a try and see what happens. So I've got my bags labeled with the batch number and then what it is, the date that it went into the freeze dryer, and then the number of slices. Get out 12 slices and 12. And I'm not sure if I should count these as a full slice, but I think I'm going to. Okay, that's a lot of slices. That it's about a tomato and a half, and I think if I puff them up, I think it's going to be okay. I certainly hope so. We'll get all these bagged and we'll be back. I've got the first 10 bags filled with tomato slices, from 8 to 12 slices. So I'm going to put the oxygen absorbers in and get them sealed up. And I'm also going to do more of that controversial puffing them with air because I don't have the nitrogen tank yet. Okay, I'll drop an oxygen absorber down into each one, making sure that it gets out of the way of the seal area. Then I'm going to zip up the one side a little bit, but not all the way across. So you're probably not going to be sure about this. Well, neither am I. So I'm sealing it most of the way, and then going to add the air hose in here and then puff it up like a balloon. And with it puffed up like a balloon, I'll zipper it shut, and then I'm going to heat seal it. And it's going to collapse down on itself a bit, but it shouldn't crush the tomatoes this way. Yeah, I know. I don't know how I feel about this either. But I don't want my tomatoes crushed. Well, that's a puffy bag, because I want them puffy like a potato chip bag. And next time I will have nitrogen for this. As you can tell, I'm serious about not wanting my tomatoes to be crushed. And I don't know how much time it'll take before I know if this was a good idea or a really bad idea. If this were nitrogen, I wouldn't even be concerned. But with just regular air, it just seems wrong. Now, I'm going to go ahead and heat seal those before I finish the other tomatoes. So I still have this many tomatoes left to bag, but I'm going to get these sealed right now. Yeah, I've got a good clean seal all the way across there. Well, we'll get them all sealed and then be right back. I'm going to do this one again. I've got it at an angle, so I did not get the full seal. Well, it looks like I did, just barely, but I want to make sure. Okay, now it's good. Positively. I'm going to go ahead and finish these first 10. So the last thing before they get stored away is to get the gross weight of the entire bag as it sets right now. So I'll weigh each one of them and then write the weight on the bag. So that's 38 grams. Okay, I've got the weight on the bag. Now if they start to get heavier because I did a bad job on sealing it, because I did damage the bag, something to allow moisture to get in there, I'll be able to tell. So we'll get the rest of these labeled, I'll get the rest of them bagged, and then I'm going to leave them set out until tomorrow so we can look at them to see how much they shrink. But I think this should keep them from squishing the tomatoes inside, I'm hoping. So we'll find out. We'll be back when I've got them done. That batch of tomatoes is bagged finally. I use 17 1-quart bags, and they have somewhere between 8 and 12 slices per bag. And then I puffed them up like crazy, and then we'll watch them. We'll check them again tomorrow before I put them in the bins so we can kind of look at it. I'll try to leave the camera in the same position so we can see in a split screen, or then we can see perhaps in a fade how they've changed. They should shrink down a little bit, but they shouldn't be too bad. And on the plus side, in an emergency, these could be used for a flotation device. These tomatoes will be hopefully not stuck together when I go to use them. We'll find out later. There's the bags. I'm going to try to leave the camera set in that same position. We'll check it again tomorrow. It's the next day. It's about 23 hours later, so they've just been sitting here while I've done other things. So you can see they are no longer puffed like a balloon, but they're still very full. So now I shouldn't have to worry about it crushing the tomatoes. You can see they have gone down by the 21% of the oxygen, but they're still hopefully not crushing the tomatoes. I can see it's touching the tomatoes on this one. I'm hoping it's not pushing so hard that it crushes. We'll get all these bags in the bin with the other one on the rack and on to the next ones. I won't show the next particular batch, number 611, Because it's not going to be very interesting. As far as I know, it should be just the same old stuff, and we'll get to something else. It's only been just under 12 weeks since I put these in the bag. These are the ones with the little bags inside. Well, let's just open it and check them. Okay, these are from the 4th of February, and today is the 26th of April. And I don't know how these are going to do. Okay, so I have 2 bags in there, and of course the oxygen absorber. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Okay, they look good. Okay, that feels perfect. All right, so I was going to make a BLT, but I don't have any lettuce today. It'll just be tomato and bacon. Okay, so I'm going to break one of these just so we can hear it. Okay, they feel perfectly good still. All right, that's good. Wow, that's quite good. So again, it's only been 12 weeks, or just under 12 weeks, but they seem like they're doing perfectly. Going for some Miracle Whip because I don't do mayo. They look perfect. Gonna just add some of the bacon pieces on there. I think I'm gonna add a little bit more Miracle Whip on that. So I wish I had some lettuce, but I don't. So we'll just add some bacon to that. So the bottom line is the tomato worked real well. It's still good. It's been only like 12 weeks, and this is the tomato with the salt on it. So it adds a nice saltiness to the tomato, and I always add salt to my tomatoes on my sandwiches. This way I don't have to because it's already on there. So there you have it. The tomato seems to work very nice. Freeze drying. I do want to store them with nitrogen instead of the oxygen and then the absorbers. I think it would be even better. But this is what I had, and that seemed to work. All right. So that adds a perfect tomato flavor to it. It's, yeah, that adds a perfect tomato flavor to the sandwich. Works out very well. We'll see how they last long term, but so far, so good. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching. So now, getting ready to batch. And this shouldn't be controversial, but it might be. Crunchy Cheetos are the only really good Cheetos. Those puffy things, the flavor's fine, but the texture's bad. Crunchy Cheetos are the good Cheetos. I was just thinking about that because when you upload a YouTube video, you have to say whether or not there's something controversial in it. Well, that's controversial, isn't it? Okay, I'll meet you back here, same bat station, same bat time.